Welcome to A Quick Note, where we dive into fascinating moments from history. Today, we're unraveling the gripping aftermath of Abraham Lincoln's assassination and the pursuit of John Wilkes Booth. If you enjoy intriguing historical narratives, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our deep dives into the past. On the evening of April 14, 1865, a man named John Wilkes Booth, who was a famous actor and supported the Confederate side during the Civil War, did a really bad thing. He shot and killed President Abraham Lincoln while he was watching a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. This happened just 5 days after the leader of the Confederate Army, General Robert E. Lee, gave up and surrendered, which basically marked the end of the big fight known as the American Civil War. Who was John Wilkes Booth? John Wilkes Booth was born in 1838 in Maryland, and he came from a family of famous actors. Just like his family, he became an actor too and made his debut in 1855, performing in Shakespeare's play Richard III in Baltimore. Even though Booth supported the Confederate side during the Civil War, he stayed in the northern states and continued to be a successful actor. However, as the war was ending, he and some friends came up with a plan to kidnap the president, Abraham Lincoln, and take him to Richmond, which was the capital of the Confederate States. On March 20, 1865, the day they had planned to kidnap Abraham Lincoln, things didn't go as John Wilkes Booth and his 6 fellow conspirators had hoped. Lincoln didn't show up at the expected place, and their kidnapping plot fell apart. 2 weeks later, Union forces captured Richmond, and on April 9, General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, signaling the end of the Confederate cause. Feeling desperate, Booth came up with an even darker plan to try to save the Confederacy. Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Finding out that Abraham Lincoln was going to watch a famous play called Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., on April 14, John Wilkes Booth came up with an even worse plan than kidnapping. He and his friends thought that if they assassinated Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William H. Seward all at the same time, it would create chaos in the U.S. government. These were the president and 2 people who could take his place. When the Lincolns finally got to the theater that night, they were a bit late, but the president seemed to be in a good mood. He and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, were sitting in a private box above the stage with a young Army officer named Henry Rathbone and Rathbone's fiancée, Clara Harris, who was the daughter of New York Senator Ira Harris. The Lincoln Assassination. At 10:15 that night, John Wilkes Booth quietly entered the private box where Abraham Lincoln was watching the play. He used a small, powerful pistol and shot Lincoln in the back of his head. After that, he stabbed a man named Rathbone, who tried to stop him, in the shoulder. Booth then jumped onto the stage and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," which means "thus ever to tyrants," the motto of the state of Virginia. At first, people in the audience thought this was part of the show, but when they heard the First Lady scream, they realized something was very wrong. Despite breaking his leg during the escape, Booth managed to leave the theater and get away from Washington on horseback. In the audience that night, a 23-year-old doctor named Charles Leal quickly went to the presidential box as soon as he heard the gunshot and Mary Lincoln's scream. There, he found the president sitting in his chair, unable to move and having a hard time breathing. Some soldiers helped carry Lincoln to a nearby boarding house and laid him on a bed. When the Surgeon General arrived, he sadly realized that Lincoln's injuries were too severe, and it was unlikely that he could be saved. It was feared that he might not survive through the night. Lincoln's death and autopsy. Vice President Andrew Johnson, along with members of Lincoln's cabinet and some of his dearest friends, stayed by the president's bedside at the boarding house. In a room nearby, the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln, lay on a bed with her eldest son, Robert Todd Lincoln, beside her, feeling a mix of shock and deep sorrow. At last, Lincoln was officially declared dead at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, at the age of 56. After Lincoln's death, his body was carefully placed in a temporary coffin, covered with a flag, and accompanied by armed cavalry to the White House. There, surgeons conducted a detailed autopsy. While the autopsy was underway, Mary Lincoln sent a note to the surgeons, asking them to cut a lock of Lincoln's hair for her. One of the army surgeons present, Edward Curtis, later described the scene. He recounted that, during the removal of Lincoln's brain, a bullet dropped into a basin. The surgeons paused to look at the bullet, realizing its significance as the cause of profound changes in world history, changes that they might never fully comprehend. Lincoln's funeral, a nation mourns. The news of President Lincoln's death spread rapidly, and by the day's end, flags nationwide were lowered to half-mast, businesses shut down, and a nation that had recently celebrated the end of the Civil War, was now grappling with the shocking reality of Lincoln's assassination. On April 18, Lincoln's body was taken to the Capitol Rotunda and placed on a catafalque for people to pay their respects. 3 days later, his remains were placed on a train that carried him to Springfield, Illinois, his former hometown before he became president. As the train carrying President Lincoln's body made its way through the North, tens of thousands of Americans lined the railroad route to pay their respects to their fallen leader. The solemn procession was a poignant moment of mourning for the nation. On May 4, 1865, Lincoln and his son, William Wallace Lincoln, Willie, who had passed away in the White House from typhoid fever in 1862, were laid to rest at Oak Ridge Cemetery near Springfield. The grief was overwhelming for Mary Todd Lincoln. She was so devastated that she remained in bed for weeks and couldn't attend the funeral. Her vocal expression of grief led to her being ostracized from society. John Wilkes Booth's capture and death. While the nation was grieving, Union soldiers were actively pursuing John Wilkes Booth, who had been quickly recognized by many in the audience. After escaping from the Capitol, Booth and his accomplice, David Herold, crossed the Anacostia River and headed toward southern Maryland. Stopping at the home of Samuel Mudd, a doctor who treated Booth's broken leg. Mudd later received a life sentence, which was later commuted. The pair sought refuge from Thomas A. Jones, a Confederate agent. They then managed to secure a boat to row across the Potomac to Virginia. On April 26, Union troops surrounded the barn in Virginia where Booth and Herold were hiding and set it on fire, hoping to force them out. Herold surrendered, but Booth stayed inside. As the fire grew more intense, a sergeant shot Booth in the neck, claiming that Booth had raised his gun as if to shoot. Booth was carried out of the burning building alive, but he only survived for 3 more hours. During that time, he looked at his hands and uttered his final words, "Useless, useless." 4 of Booth's accomplices were found guilty for their involvement in the assassination plot, and were executed by hanging on July 7, 1865. Among them were David Herold and Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt holds the grim distinction of being the first woman to be put to death by the federal government. Her boarding house had been used as a meeting place for the individuals planning the kidnapping. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey into the events surrounding Abraham Lincoln's tragic end. If you found this exploration intriguing, don't hesitate to give us a thumbs up, comment with your thoughts, and, of course, subscribe for more captivating history content. Until next time, signing off from A Quick Note.